You know, this is part of why I'm wearing a nice shirt today, because I am not wearing a funny t-shirt and playing this. So this will give some background, and it's remarkable to me that these people are even able to mount this resistance, and it's incredibly heroic that they have the desire and the will after what they have been through. So this is a CNN report from 3 years ago. We're just going to play a couple of minutes of it to give you some sense. I'm going to warn you, these images are very disturbing of starving children.
There's a stark warning tonight that millions of children in Yemen could be pushed to the brink of starvation unless international aid is dramatically stepped up. It comes from UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Organization. The country faces the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with the COVID-19 pandemic compounding the effect of 5 years of civil war. Houthi rebels backed by Iran have been fighting Yemen's government, itself backed by a Saudi-led coalition, which is supported by the US and the UK. 2 million of Yemen's children are malnourished, and 1.7 million have been forced to flee their homes. With only half of the country's health facilities in operation, one child dies every 10 minutes from a preventable disease. Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen sent this report, and I must warn you, there are distressing images right from the start.
Selwa Al-Odabi is 5, the same age as the war. Selwa has cerebral atrophy, brain damage caused by malnutrition she's had since she was 2 months old. The vicious mixture that is destroying Yemen is killing her. A man-made war, man-made hunger, and the coronavirus pandemic's grip on a broken country. Selwa's parents are among the 2 million Yemenis who've been forced to flee their homes because of the war. Her father, Ibrahim, says they can't pay for any more medical treatment.
بأدب كورونا وإحنا محاصرين من الحرب من كورونا من جميع الجهات. فإحنا حالتنا لا ينبغي إلا الله. فأنا بعض الأحيان لقيت يومين 3 أيام من دون أكل. فأنا أضطر أعطيها سكر أو موية تحاول تهدأ من البكي بس.
Selwa is not the only one. UNICEF says malnutrition has caused permanent mental and physical damage to 45% of Yemen's under 5s. This is Aiden, better supplied than most parts of Yemen, but still living on the edge. There's food, if you can pay. Many cannot. It's 20% more expensive than a fortnight ago because the currency has crashed.
Okay, so Danny, you want to give us some background on how Yemen got to that state and the U.S.'s complicity in that?
Well, all of the weapons, the bombs that Saudi Arabia has dropped on Yemen, the blockade, the vicious siege that it waged upon Yemen, all of that was backed by the United States and was supplied by the United States. And so this really has been a U.S. war from the very beginning, when it launched in 2014, 2015 to stop Ansar Allah.
Hang on, wasn't that Barack Obama? That wasn't Donald Trump?
That was.
Oh.
This was a war where the casualties, I mean, the casualty in Yemen, more than 500,000 people, and half of those died in the wreckage of the war. Half of them have died for humanitarian reasons outlined in that video. And all of those deaths do fall at the feet of the Obama administration, because it was under the Obama administration where U.S. personnel, logistical personnel, were working directly with Saudi Arabia and UAE, the 2 principal countries that were bombing, destroying, torturing. There was widespread torture of Ansar Allah and anyone related, right? Does it sound familiar? It's really the war on terror continuing. It's really a redux, which is what we're seeing now in relation to the Biden administration's bombing of Yemen. So all of this is connected. And how did we get here? It was years and years and years, where it was only until 2016, 2017, the Bernie Sanders campaign, when a few Democrats started to speak up about this. But in the years preceding that, there was very little word about Yemen. Actually, Yemen got so little attention that it was difficult to even mention what was going on in this region, given that the U.S. was trying to, at the same time, overthrow the Syrian government. It was staging a coup in Ukraine and attempting, as we now know, to militarize Ukraine to fight Russia, which is exactly what ended up happening when Russia launched its special military operation in February 2022. So this war has gone through all of these attempted regime change wars of the United States, and the casualties have been absolutely enormous. And it's not over. If you read, and I like to do this, you go to Yemen state media. It's called Saba. You go there, and they have a whole row of Saudi aggression on Yemen. They have a whole section on it. Why? Because it has not necessarily ended. There has been a relative ceasefire. There has been movement toward a peace agreement. But in many ways, what the United States is attempting to do is to reignite what this Saudi so-called coalition-led coalition of the willing was doing all of this time. And it's failing, which is a great thing. But at the same time, the devastation has not ended yet. This is what makes this such a historic moment, is that the people of Yemen, Ansar Allah leading them, have not only have they not given up, but they're now leading probably the strongest response to what Israel is doing, and the U.S., of course, is doing in Gaza at this moment. It's really kind of an astounding and a real unprecedented moment in history.
In New York, there was sorry, Russell.
Go ahead. Keaton.
I was just going to say, in New York, there was this, big emergency protest last night as news broke that the U.S. and the U.K. were bombing. I feel this is another example, very shortly on the back of the first example, which came on October 7th, where the masses are going to have to do a lot of learning in a very short period of time. And I think Israel-Gaza gave them a bit of a head start. But this just shows you just the emptiness of the modern liberal. They didn't even know about this, first of all. I won't even give them as much credit to suppose that they even knew about Yemen, what was happening in Yemen. But they go from being, this people who we sort of, express some degree of vague, empty sort of empathy for, to now they're the enemy, right? And so how quickly are people going to get on board? How quickly are people going to mobilize against this, the same way they've flooded the streets for the Israeli bombardment of Gaza?
The interesting thing is that Ansar Allah has not killed anyone, yet they have been labeled terrorists. And if you post anything on X, for example, if you post anything on X about this, you will get a flood of replies from a lot of people across the political spectrum, many of them liberals, saying, oh, the FBI should, watch out for you, because Ansar Allah is considered just a terrorist group. And that's how they have been labeled ever since the United States and Saudi Arabia launched their war on Yemen in 2014, 2015. Just another group of terrorists that have to be eradicated, when in fact they are a legitimate political movement that now is the legitimate government of Yemen, doing something that, yes, you're right, Keaton, many people, especially those on the so-called left, need to learn more about, because it's a reflection of what's going on regionally. It really is a reflection of a regional war that's igniting, and one where there are sides to it that we must be paying attention to, because when we do this is what liberals do all the time, the liberal class, it's all bad. And when you say that, and when you do that, you end up ceding all of the ground to the real enemies, to the real perpetrators of war and genocide, which is Israel and the United States.
Yeah, and that's a reflection of wars past, is it not? There was some awareness of this because George W. Bush executed the early years of the war on terror, but then Obama picked up where he left off, and that was it, out of sight, out of mind. No one cared anymore.
It sounds like you're suggesting that the United States is not a force for peace in the world, Danny. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly what I'm saying. It couldn't be any less of a force for peace in the world, or a force for good in the world.
Well, I wasn't expecting to hear this kind of pinko
FBI
stuff
should be
today.
out for me.
All right, so this is partial statement from the Yemeni Houthi leader. Do the American, British, and Zionist expect that any aggressive act against Yemen will distract us from defending Gaza? We swear, even if we turned into atoms scattered in the air, we will not leave Gaza. We will continue to target Zionist ships and those going to the Zionist entity. We will confront America, make it kneel, burn its warships, all its bases, and anyone who cooperates with it. No matter what it costs us, we will not leave Gaza. Let the great war ignite, for we are its people and its men. To our people, our brothers, our sons, and our fathers in Gaza, we are with you. You are not alone. Our blood for you is cheap, and we are with you until our last breath. And this tweet is from Suleiman Ahmed, if you want to read the rest. So again, this is just remarkable courage from people who have been in the midst of a genocidal war themselves for almost a decade. Is it not?
That's exactly what it is. And I think it's incredibly crucial that when we read these words, we don't just read courage, but we read a force that is prepared to stand up, and not only prepared, but also successfully stand up. It will successfully stand up to the U.S. empire here because, as I said earlier, the United States, if there's a great graphic going around with NATO versus Ansar Allah or the Houthis, and it's that Ansar Allah has no tanks, no navy. It doesn't have anything except what the U.S. is calling harassment weapons, which are some missiles really that they can launch. Despite this, the United States is already admitting, and the UK, that these strikes are not going to change the outcome of what is going on in the Red Sea one bit. And what does that tell us? It tells us that the United States is really actually, in the UK too, is a paper tiger, that they can't actually influence outcomes here, no matter how many bombs, no matter how many missiles they want to launch at Yemen. Yemen has been through this for quite a while, and it's quite obvious that they're not going to sacrifice principles or solidarity with Palestine just because they're at war. They've been at war and they are currently at war, and they're going to continue to fight and fight back until they win, until they push out the aggressors.
Well, given that lack of weapons, though, are they really going to be able to sustain this?
Well, here's the thing. Let's look at history. We've had so many examples of people, of nations that have had huge technological and military disadvantages to the United States. Look at Afghanistan. The Taliban just cleaned the United States' clock, pushed out, not only pushed them out, they had the United States running. They had the Biden administration's military in the first year of his administration running out of the country because they had effectively lost. And this is true in so many other instances. Korea, Vietnam, we can go on and on and on with instances where it's not about the technology, right? There's a lot of Che Guevara, a lot of different people, Huey Newton, a lot of different, even revolutionaries in the United States have said this. They've said it's about the people. It's about, you can't really kill an idea and you can't kill all of the people. And Yemen is showing. There are massive demonstrations over the last couple of days in Yemen where they are saying, get out, stop this. It's quite clear that the people of Yemen are ready to not just defend Ansar Allah, but to continue their heroic stand with Gaza. And they don't have to defeat the U.S. militarily. They just have to not lose. That is kind of the objective of any kind of unconventional guerrilla warfare. Same thing with the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. It's the case all over the world where this has been a historical reality. You just have to not lose, because eventually there will be times where you can strike and the world situation changes where suddenly conditions are in your favor. We wouldn't have so many nations around the world that continue to exercise independence. I was just in Vietnam. If it wasn't for their heroic stand over decades against French colonial rule, and then, of course, against U.S. Attempted occupation and, of course, invasion, if it wasn't for decades of doing that, they would have lost. And yet, the world situation changed. The U.S. had to run out of that country with its pants down in many ways. And now Vietnam is an independent country that is growing at 5 to 10% per year over the last decade. So that is the kind of heroism that Yemen is showing. And it really is a modern instance of what people can really do when they have had enough.
Well, you mentioned Vietnam, and of course that's right next to Cambodia, both places where we committed acts of what you could argue were genocidal wars. It is just remarkable how brainwashed the American population is, because the greatest commission of genocide in modern times is the United States. It's not Russia. It's not China. It's clearly us. From what I understand, and you've probably been there, you go to Cambodia, there are museums to the genocide that the United States committed there.
Yeah, I've never been to Cambodia. I've been to Vietnam. I've been to China. And in both countries, because both countries have had this history with the United States and also with the broader West, there is a lot of history that is taught. I mean, you go to China, the Forbidden City, there's a lot of just relics to the Century of Humiliation, where Spanish, British, U.S. forces came in, vandalized the place, destroyed it. Vietnam, I mean, it's everywhere. I visited sites where Agent Orange was and still is a reality for now in the 4th generation, 5th generation of families, where there are still mines, landmines that have not been dug up, that are taking limbs and even entire lives in Vietnam because they're unexploded. And I visited organizations that do work to pull those mines out of the ground. So this is exactly as you say. This is the reality. The reality is that the United States, especially since 1945, we can look even further than that, though, back into history, has been the principal force for war and, yes, genocide in the world. It's just that since 1945, it has been able to take the mantle of the so-called superpower, and it has not had the opportunity to be held actually accountable for all of the crimes that it has committed in dozens upon dozens upon dozens of countries. What the United States is doing to Yemen right now is just an extension of that history, and it should not be surprising to anybody. Anyone who's surprised that the Biden administration is doing this is not paying attention to reality now or reality then.
All right, so you mentioned the protests. So millions fill the street in Yemen as Houthi rebels promise revenge against the U.S. after 73 strikes hit Yemen regions, killing 5 people. Quote, "The American and British enemy bears full responsibility for its criminal aggression against our Yemeni people, and it will not go unanswered and unpunished. The Houthis promise to continue attacking cargo ships in their support of Palestinians. Their attacks are having real impact, as Tesla recently announced they had to close their Germany factory due to delays. It didn't have to be this way." This is from Colin Rugg at the Daily Express.
Come see us do a live stand-up show. We'll be in Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Boston, Massachusetts, and we're going to Europe. Do you live in Europe? We're going to be there. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.